Good morning. Thank you everyone for participating in this announcement here today. I'd first like to welcome Tom Burton, a director for the Rural Municipalities Associations of Alberta, District 6, a councillor for the Municipal District of Greenview, and a member of the Grand Prairie District Crime Watch Association. I want to thank Tom for being here and thank the Rural Municipalities of Alberta for their continued support they provided our government in helping us work to improve the justice system here in Alberta. When this government was elected, we committed to listening to Albertans to ensure we have a justice system that reflected Alberta's unique character and our unique challenges and concerns. Albertans themselves understand the realities that face their communities better than anyone. During my time as Justice Minister, I've had the opportunity to travel across Alberta. I spent time listening to thousands of Albertans as they brought forward their ideas, and this announcement here today truly is a reflection of us listening to Albertans and giving a voice to your concerns. No matter which community I've visited, one thing I heard loud and clear is that people feel as though the justice system right now is broken and that it needs to be improved upon. They're frustrated with the havoc that crime has had on their communities, the mental health anguish that this has caused for so many. They're frustrated that when they see a revolving door justice system where crimes are committed by repeat offenders who exploit gaps in the criminal justice system to target property owners who are especially vulnerable. And they want a fairer, faster, more responsive justice system that protects them, their loved ones, and their property from repeat offenders. So to those Albertans who have felt like they haven't been heard in the past, we hear you and we listen, and we're listening to you. And today we're taking more action to ensure Alberta's justice system better reflects the values of Albertans. We hope that with today's announcement, we continue to provide Albertans with a justice system that meets their needs and one that better reflects their values. And with that, I'd like to introduce Premier Kenney.
Thank you very much, Doug. So I'm pleased to be here with Minister Schweitzer for an important announcement to make the justice system in Alberta faster, fairer, and better at protecting law-abiding citizens in our province. You know that in recent years we have seen a significant wave of crime, particularly in rural Alberta. And that is probably connected in part to several years of economic stagnation. Unfortunately, it means that in many counties and rural municipalities, we've seen an increase of as much as 300% in the number of crimes. And too often, that's because of a revolving door justice system where criminals are arrested, convicted, and are back out on the streets, re-victimizing more Albertans and causing frustration for our police and law-abiding citizens. Maclean's magazine, in its 2019 compilation of Canada's most dangerous places, named 7 Alberta communities among the top 10 in the country with the highest increases in crime over the previous 5 years. Meanwhile, during the same period, as I say, rural Alberta experienced an unprecedented wave in property crime in particular. As any police officer will tell you, most crime is committed by a very small percentage of the population, typically by the same repeat offenders. It's disturbing to read the profiles of the dozens of criminals on the Alberta Justice Department's list of high-risk offenders. These are dangerous repeat offenders who have been released back into our communities after getting paroled or completing their sentences, but they're considered such a high risk to reoffend that police are compelled to issue public warnings about their return to our streets. Most are inmates of the federal justice system, but some of these high-risk offenders are criminals who were sentenced to jail terms of 2 years or less and were therefore the responsibility of Alberta's correction system. They include sex offenders and others who are clearly a threat to law-abiding Albertans. In last year's election, we promised to crack down on crime through actions including hiring more prosecutors, providing more tools and resources to our frontline police officers, and several measures to tackle perpetrators of most crime in Alberta, the repeat offenders. The Federal Parole Board currently has responsibility for determining the fate of all prisoners in Alberta, including when they get out of jail, and under what conditions they're allowed back in the community, even those who are prisoners in Alberta correctional institutions. Federal parole boards filled with Ottawa's appointees aren't as sensitive or as responsive to the needs and concerns of Alberta communities as they could be or should be. And when they make mistakes and set loose dangerous criminals who commit further crimes, it's Albertans who pay the price. That's why I am very pleased to announce that today the Government of Alberta is introducing in the legislature Bill 18, the Corrections Amendment Act, that will replace the Parole Board of Canada with a new Alberta Parole Board responsible provincial offenders sentenced to prison terms of less than 2 years. This was a commitment made in the last election, another promise made, and another promise kept. With a provincial parole board, Alberta will take control of a critical aspect of the administration of justice in our province. This initiative, modeled on long-standing provincial parole boards in Ontario and Quebec, will create a fairer, faster, and more responsible justice system that better protects Albertans, their loved ones, and their property from parolees who reoffend. Alberta Parole Board members will be appointed based on their specific knowledge of crime trends and resources in their area, which means they will be better equipped to set safe parole conditions than federally appointed parole boards. They will work closely with community probation officers armed with local knowledge and ties to the local communities, which will increase the efficiency and the effectiveness of provincial supervision of provincial parolees. In 2018-19, 212 provincial offenders submitted a parole application. 92 applications were withdrawn, 50 were granted parole. We don't know how many of them have reoffended. All Ottawa tells us is that 3 had their parole revoked for, quotes, unspecified reasons, unquotes. The Alberta Parole Board in the future, which we expect to be operational by January of 2021, will be fully transparent. We'll track parolees very closely and report to Albertans on the status of those in the system. The actions we've taken today will make Alberta's parole system more responsive to and safer for Albertans. And it'll make the provincial parole process, as I say, more transparent. In the larger context of Alberta's relationship with the federal government and the proper division of powers and responsibilities within the Federation, an Alberta Parole Board will strengthen Alberta's autonomy and our control over a very important part of our justice system. That means more Alberta and less Ottawa. Albertans elected this government to pursue a fairer deal for our province in Canada across a whole range of areas. That quest for fairness is driven by a desire for government that is more focused on the needs and goals of Albertans and that is more sensitive to our circumstances, responsive to our priorities. The Alberta Parole Board will serve that goal. It will improve our justice system and will make our streets safer by making better decisions about who, when, and how criminals in provincial jails are released back into our communities. And with that, looking forward to hearing from Councillor.
Thank you, Premier. Just one correction the Minister had made, and I'll speak to that in the speaking notes here. I'd like, first of all, to take this opportunity to thank the Premier and the Minister for introducing Bill 18, the Corrections Amendment Act. As they stated, my name is Tom Burton. I'm a councillor for the MD of Greenview and also a director for District 4, not 6. It's Ward 6 for the municipality, so you had 6 in there, right? That's okay. And I want to stress, RMA, the Rural Municipalities of Alberta, governs approximately 85% of the area of the landmass of this province. So we're comprised of 69 rural municipalities, which means we are the level of government closest to the people. With this closeness to the people, we hear the concerns around the revolving door or the catch and release that's happening. And I'm not talking about fishing. I'm referring to the criminals that keep re-offending. As Premier Kenney stated, there's a small percentage of the criminals which creates the majority of the crimes, which in the end we're having to have the police officers chase this small percentage of criminals rather than addressing the other criminal activities that is happening in our communities. Regardless of where you live in Alberta, all Albertans deserve to feel safe in their homes and communities. There are unique challenges of policing in rural Alberta with the vast areas of undeveloped landscape. Albertans still need and want to feel safe in their homes and communities, but there isn't that protection that is needed for this to happen. Safe communities are critical to attracting and retaining residents and businesses. In rural Alberta, in rural areas, there is the essential, in rural areas, this is especially critical as many properties are located in isolated areas far from neighbors or services, thus leaving them extremely vulnerable to the criminals. Due to the unique challenges of police in rural Alberta, supporting safe rural communities requires collaboration amongst many groups, be it the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Alberta Justice, municipalities, or our local nonprofit organizations. We all need to work together, ensuring we're protecting our communities. Premier Kenney, Minister Schweitzer, and the Alberta government is working on reducing some of the threats to rural Alberta. With the government, Alberta had committed to increasing the number of Crown prosecutors and police officers. Now with the creation of the Alberta Parole Board, some of the challenging criminals hopefully will not be back on the streets. These repeat offenders should not be released based on the Parole Board of Canada's recommendations. In most cases, the Parole Board members are not from Alberta and don't understand what's happening in Alberta. Let an Alberta Parole Board make the decisions. Thank you, Premier Kenney, Minister Schweitzer, for introducing Bill 18, the Correction Amendment Act, the Alberta Parole Board. So thank you for that.
All
I'll
right.
step back.
Yeah, we'll give you back your X marks the spot there.
All right, we'll begin the Q&A. Operator, can you please put through the first caller?
Thank you very much. The first question is from Dean Bennett of the Canadian Press. Dean, your line is open. Please go ahead.
Thanks. Good morning. Question for the Premier, I guess, or the Justice Minister. You're saying that, Premier, that we need to make the system safer for Albertans. How will this board actually do that? So, for example, are you going to give a different set of criteria for the board members to consider? There'll be a different test, a different bar for potential parolees to meet? I guess that's my question.
Well, Dean, there's an old saying that personnel is policy, and the personnel that we will be choosing to make up the Alberta Parole Board will be people who are coming from communities that have been facing this crime wave over recent years. They're going to be a lot more sensitive to the public safety imperative than we believe the Federal Parole Board has been. And they'll be more in touch with the resources that are available, with the reality of the revolving door system that we've seen, particularly for minor offenses. Remember that most of that anybody who ends up in an Alberta Correctional Institute has been sentenced to a penal sentence of 2 years or less. And so these tend to be more like property crimes than serious violent crimes. And the problem is that once you discount time served in pretrial custody and other factors, very often people are passing through those provincial correctional institutes very quickly. And all too often, many of these people end up reoffending. And we know that in some cases that's happening while they've been on parole. So this ensures that Albertans who are dealing with the crime wave, particularly in the rural areas on property crime, will be making these decisions more mindful of the community safety goal. And with that, I'd ask Doug to supplement that answer.
No, Premier, you've covered it off quite well. In the town halls that we did last fall, commentary from people and their frustration in the justice system was echoed time after time after time. We need to restore confidence of Albertans. The justice system has heard them, that the justice system is going to respond to their needs. This is one of the steps that we're taking now to make sure that they feel confident that the system is going to work for them.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Yes, the next question is from Rick Bell of the Calgary Sun. Please go ahead.
Good morning. It's a question for the Premier. It is on another topic that's being debated at Calgary City Council today, which is the Green Line LRT. I know a project which you were very involved with, committing federal money for that completion of the project. They're debating the Green Line LRT, but just to be clear, it is going exactly the same distance as the other alignments. It is still going from 16th Avenue to Shepherd. The Green Line LRT as envisioned now is not going to the north suburbs, nor is it going to the deep south suburbs. They are planning some bus rapid transit to the north suburbs, but the actual LRT, Premier, is only going from 16th Avenue north to Shepherd. It's not going down to the far south. So my question to you is, what do you think about this Green Line LRT project, particularly since you were gave some of the money toward it, and what would you think about the idea of offering more money down the line, whenever that will be, to finish the LRT to get it to the north suburbs and the south suburbs?
Rick, I've made it no secret that I've been frustrated with the shrinking LRT. When I committed $1.5 billion to the project on behalf of the federal government back in 2015, it was supposed to be, I think, 45 kilometers long, going from the far north of the city to the far southeast, and I think it was supposed to establish about 25 LRT stops that would have served hundreds of thousands of people. And in the ensuing years, it got cut in half and at the same cost. And I found this very frustrating. It seemed that the city decided to focus on the downtown core rather than those parts of the city where taxpayers have less access to mass transit. And so this has always been a concern we've raised with the city. If they are looking at any changes to the routing or the community served, we'd be happy to have a conversation with the city about that to see how we can get more bang for the taxpayers' buck, how we can get more Calgarians served by the Green Line. And in terms of more money, well, look, we will be rolling out additional funds to create jobs during this economic downturn through infrastructure funding. There will be an announcement coming in the days to follow about additional support, including for municipal priorities and provincial strategic priorities to help advance our economy. And so, you know, we'll listen to the municipalities in terms of what their priorities are, but I guess we have a lot of questions yet to be answered before we would commit to any additional Green Line funding at this point.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Thank you. Lisa Johnson, Postmedia.
Hi, good morning, Premier. I have a couple of questions. I'm wondering, and maybe this is for the Minister, how much this parole board is going to cost the provincial government, if you guys have costed it out. And I'm wondering if you can also comment on some statements that the former chairman of UCP, or sorry, founding chairman of the UCP, Ed Amar, made on Twitter that involved some expletives. I won't repeat the whole thing, but I'm wondering if you can offer your comments on that, Premier.
With respect to your question around the cost for the Alberta Parole Board, it's about $600,000 annual cost to operate the Alberta Parole Board.
And yeah, thanks. And I would also point out that we will be receiving some federal funding like Ontario and Quebec to offset that cost. Ontario and Quebec both have their own provincial parole boards, and I think they always have. So we're simply claiming the same power that they've always exercised. I'm afraid I haven't seen the tweet to which you're referring. I don't spend a lot of time on Twitter. I try to spend as little as I possibly can. To be honest with you, I don't approve of any vulgar language being used by people on social media. In fact, I generally mute or block accounts that do that. So that's all I can say.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Thank you. James Keller, Globe and Mail.
Another somewhat off-topic question for, I guess, either the Premier or the Minister, whoever wants to take it. Can you tell us where we are in terms of appointing a Chief Firearms Officer, whether you've made the decision to press ahead with that, and what changes specifically you would hope to see under a provincially appointed officer rather than one picked by the RCMP?
We have a motion before the legislature that is being debated to support the creation of an Alberta Chief Firearms Officer, a prerogative that the province has had but not exercised since the adoption of Bill C-69 back in, I think, 1995. Other provinces have used that power to create Chief Firearms Officers. It is our intention to do that. I anticipate the government side of the House will pass that motion in the days to come. Again, this comes back to what I said earlier, that often personnel is policy. By appointing an Alberta Chief Firearms Officer, we believe we can have somebody who, while obviously committed to upholding the law, will do so in a way that focuses enforcement on criminal misuse of firearms rather than regulatory harassment of safe, legal, law-abiding farmers and duck hunters. We acknowledge that the Government of Canada has established through the courts over the last 20 years clear constitutional jurisdiction over the regulation of firearms. This goes back to a challenge that Alberta led against that Bill C-69 in the late 1990s. Supreme Court of Canada clearly established a federal paramountcy in this area, as it did more recently in another case. And so now, having said that, we understand that there may be some private Canadian citizens, including Albertans, filing legal challenges against recent actions by the federal government targeting legal law-abiding firearms owners. And the government of Alberta will keep its options open about potentially supporting those legal challenges. Our view is the Government of Canada is missing the target. If it wants to reduce criminal gun abuse of firearms in Canada, criminal misuse of firearms, they should be redoubling efforts to interdict the importation of illicit firearms, primarily from the United States. The data, the evidence is clear. The significant majority of firearms used in criminal acts in Canada are firearms that were smuggled in from the United States. They are not hunting rifles used by rural Albertans, for example. They are overwhelmingly firearms brought in across the U.S. border. And so if the federal government were really serious about tackling that kind of gun crime, which tends to be fueled mainly by drug gangs, then they should be focusing on the border crossings and on those illicit firearms being smuggled into the country. And so telling law-abiding firearms owners who have a perfect record, by the way, who have acquired their firearms based on their firearms acquisition certificate, based on continued monitoring, people who are law-abiding, safe, respectful, upright citizens, to tell them that their firearms are going to be seized or criminalized because some gangs down east are importing weapons across the border makes no sense. Doug, do you want to comment further on that?
This Liberal policy has caused huge frustrations in Alberta. We've held telephone town halls, talked to stakeholders about this issue, and it's just immensely causing an immense amount of frustration for law-abiding citizens here in the province of Alberta. Earlier this year, we had an opportunity to meet with all the justice ministers across Canada, as well as with the public safety minister federally. We asked them, to consult with Albertans, tread softly on this issue, make sure that they listen to Albertans. And instead, we've got a half policy that was rushed through that really isn't focusing on why we have gun crimes in our country. And that's really stemming from illegal guns that are being imported into our country through organized crime. If the federal government was serious about tackling gun crimes, they'd be cracking down at the borders and going after organized crime.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Thank you. The next question is from Kevin Nimick of CTV.
Hi, Premier. Protesters and rallies are scheduled across the province this week to bring attention to racism in Alberta and south of the border. Do you support the Black Lives Matter movement and these protests?
Well, first of all, I denounce racism in any form and police brutality anywhere that it occurs. And we need to acknowledge that we're not perfect in Canada, that we always need to strive to do better in ensuring equality of all before the law. And that is something I did worked on for many years through anti-racism measures when I was the Federal Minister of Multiculturalism. And so I understand why people are quite rightly outraged about the video that appeared last week and about the incident that occurred in Minneapolis. And in terms of protests, we acknowledge, of course, that the right to protest is a constitutional right in Canada. I would just remind people that we are trying to do everything we reasonably can to avoid super spreader events, while the COVID-19 pandemic still represents a threat to lives and health here in Alberta. And that is why the government has a public health order to limit public gatherings to no more than 50 people outdoors. And we ask people, if they do happen to gather congregated in the same areas, that at the very least they do everything they can to maintain 2 meters of distance with others, and where possible to wear a face covering to help reduce the chances of transmission of the virus. So this is very important. Again, here in Alberta, we've been trying to balance our constitutional rights, including freedom of assembly, with that public health imperative. And we would just ask people, if they feel strongly about that or other issues, there's lots of ways they can express themselves. But let's all work together to try to avoid potential super spreader events that could undermine the progress that we've made as Albertans in flattening the curve against the COVID pandemic.
Okay, we have time for 2 more. Operator, can you put through the next caller, please?
Yes, the next question is from Janet French of CBC. Please go ahead.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. I suppose this is a question for both the Premier and for Minister Schweitzer. If you're having people stay in provincial correctional centres longer, if you're sort of assuming that the Parole Board will deny requests or lengthen the amount of time that somebody would stay in jail, presumably that comes with an additional cost. And you've got a 3-year budget plan that shows the amount of money going to corrections being reduced. So I'm wondering, what's your sort of long-term estimate of how much more it's going to cost the correctional system to keep these inmates warehoused, and where's the additional funding going to come from?
Yeah, and again, when it comes to operating our correctional centers, many of the costs that go into there are fixed costs that we have that go in to operating our correction centers. We can get you further details as well if you need any for your article today regarding specific costing, but we don't want to presuppose what the decisions would be for the Alberta Parole Board as well going forward. We do believe it'll have a better reflection of what's happening on the ground here in the province of Alberta. The overall cost to operate the Alberta Parole Board is in the neighborhood of about $600,000.
All right. Operator, can you please put through the last caller?
Yes, the last question is from Tom Burton of Global News. Please go ahead.
Hi, Premier. Thanks for taking my question. Today, the federal government did an advance on the gas tax to municipalities, and when asked about further funding support, he said that municipalities are tied to provincial governments, and it's the provinces that will have to take the lead on this, and he is willing to work with provinces on this issue. Funding for municipalities, is this something that's on your radar, and is this something that you'll be holding conversations with the federal government on?
Well, yes and yes. So this is an issue that's been discussed periodically on the weekly First Ministers meeting during the COVID crisis, particularly in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And I also spoken to our big city mayors, plus both the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association and the Rural Municipalities Association. Just, I think last Thursday I had a conference call with Mayors Iveson, Nenshi, and the presidents of AUMA and RMA on this and other issues. If the federal government is accelerating the gas tax transfer for municipalities, that happens through the province. It's a transfer to Alberta. We would then, in turn, push that money out to the municipalities as quick as we can. So we would be very keen to work with the feds on pushing that money through to our municipalities. I know that many municipalities, like everyone in Alberta these days, are facing a huge fiscal challenge. Mayor Iveson says in particular that relates to the huge decline in mass transit utilization. And so the gas tax transfer is in part to support things like mass transit. So I guess the munis could see that as a partial response to the issue that they have raised. In addition, we will, as a provincial government, be announcing further increases in provincial transfers to support job-creating capital projects, infrastructure, to the municipalities. And we've also received hundreds of submissions from our municipal governments on strategic priority infrastructure projects. Because obviously we're facing a double economic whammy between the global coronavirus recession and the collapse in energy prices, obviously meaning we've got a huge increase in unemployment. We expect that to be reflected in this Friday's jobs numbers, and that's one of the reasons why we are going to be surging even more money into job-creating capital projects, in part in cooperation with the municipalities. I should point out that we were already maintaining a huge capital budget for this year of $6.9 billion, much of that through transfers to municipalities, like through the MSI, Municipal Sustainability Initiative. And then we've surged an additional $1 billion into maintenance and repair work to get people back to work, supporting infrastructure. And as I say, we'll be also announcing some additional support for munis in the days and weeks to come. So thanks very much, everyone, for your questions.